Welcome to Running for Real, a global community with a shared love and curiosity for running. Together we reconnect with the reasons why we love to run and discover ways it helps us become better people. Whether it's the quiet moments of a morning run while the rest of the world still sleeps, or befriending the strangers next to you at the start line of a race. We are here to connect with others who see running as the common thread that weaves our lives together. Come join me, Tina Muir, as I talk with people from all walks of life, united by a love of running. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 275 of the Running for Real podcast. I am excited that you are here today. Thank you for joining me. I know you could be spending your time in many other places, listening to other shows, doing other things. We all have limited time nowadays, and we appreciate you joining us here at Running for Real. Now, my guest today, I have been following from afar for quite a while now, and I have loved seeing over the past few months, over the past year, how she is really starting to get a lot of attention from bigger people within the space, from the names. Really, her work is being recognized, and there's good reason for it. Today, I'm excited to welcome Guarina Lopez to the show, who is a member of the Pascua Yaqui tribe of Tucson, Arizona. She's a runner. She's the founder of Native Women Ride. She is a photographer, filmmaker, and also does writing to share stories of land and indigenous communities. It is just such an honor to have her here. I am proud and excited to be able to help amplify her story, which deserves to be shared and is a very powerful one at that. And we are going to go meet Guarina in just a minute. Once we thank one of our sponsors, we'll be right to the episode. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast and for being such a good supporter and partner to Running for Real as a whole. Now, Tracksmith, as you likely know, is an independent running brand fueled by a deep love of the sport. They know that together the running community has the power to drive positive change, and it inspired them to rethink about how they work with their partners to show up for others. I'm really excited and proud that we are going to be using our sponsorship, our support with Tracksmith in a new way to support another group that really is doing some amazing work. So 5% of all sales made by Running for Real listeners will go to support Runners for Public Lands, which is a 501c3 non-profit environmental organization dedicated to environmental justice, advocacy, and conservation. Now, you can use code TINA15 to participate, and you will also receive free shipping on your entire order. And you also, if you go to the link tracksmith.com/collections/running-for-real, I will also put a link in the show notes. I know it can be hard to remember long links like that. You will see all the information about what I just told you there, and also some of my favorite picks. I am loving the Brighton base layer and especially the new colors they have it in. And as always, I am a big fan of the Speed Session shorts. So you can go to tracksmith.com to learn more. I will find the links in the show notes to go get yourself that special offer that is going to support Runners for Public Lands. Thank you again to Tracksmith for sponsoring and supporting Running for Real. Guarina, I am so excited for you to be joining me today on the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And, I want to start just giving the listeners just a little bit of general information about you, and then we'll go deeper in, being that you are a member of the Pascua Yaqui tribe of Tucson, Arizona. You're a runner. You're a founder of Native Women Ride and a number of other things on social media we'll talk about later. You're really into photography, film, love to write stories, share stories of the land and indigenous communities. Anything else you want to add? Oh, and a mother. Big one, I forgot there. Anything else you want to add to before we begin, of just things that people could know about you, just without diving in too deep?
I love coffee.
Okay. That's a big one, I suppose. So yes. How many cups of coffee do you drink in a day, dare I ask?
I actually only drink one in the morning. I used to drink coffee.
You're like a savor the coffee person, right?
Yes, I have a very nice cup of coffee in the morning. I used to work at coffee shops when I was growing up. And so I would have specialty coffees all throughout the day that I would bake for myself. But then I was an insomniac for a long time, so I really had to cut back. But I love the smell. I love coffee ice cream, even though I'm allergic to dairy. I will definitely take a taste.
Yeah. So then are you, I don't want to say a coffee snob, but like a lot of people who really like the savor the coffee, not the like, I need this to survive the next 2 hours people. It's like my aunt is one of those people, and she'll come to America and she'll be like, the coffee is terrible here. And I'm like, I mean, I don't really taste too much of a difference from like what you say is a good coffee and a bad coffee, but like, yeah. Do you very much go into like you very selective when you're choosing a coffee?
I'm not super selective, but I just can't handle bitter things. And so coffee can be bitter, So immediately if I, have some coffee and it just doesn't feel right, I won't drink it, but I'm not going to criticize it. I mean, most of my family grew up drinking Folgers, so that's just like it was like processed.
Yeah, even I know that's not the best.
But that was a smell that, I think the commercial is like Folgers in your cup or something.
Yeah.
Silly. But, no, my dad, one of my favorite memories is that I would make my dad's coffee in the morning. And when I asked him how much cream he wanted, he said, I want my coffee the color of Guarina. So I would put my finger next to the cup and add the creamer just really slowly and then kind of mix it until
your finger?
Yeah.
Does he know you did that?
I think he kind of, I actually don't think he knew that I stuck my finger in. He'd probably be pretty peeved because I'm sure.
You're like, this is literally the color of me and me is in it from staring around one of the childhood things I've been
all
touching.
My germs.
That's funny. But thank you for sharing that. That's good to know. And so as we have, I'm sure, many coffee enthusiasts, you have to give a best coffee you've had out. Does one come to mind?
So I drink Illy. It's an Italian coffee.
Oh, I've seen that. You can buy that, right?
Yeah. So I buy it at the grocery store or order it online. And I use one of those kind of metal coffee presses, They're just, I don't know what they're called. I've had it for so long. I actually travel with it. So I guess I'm not too picky about if I'm not at home drinking coffee, but if I travel, I bring my own coffee and I bring my own coffee maker. Nice. So I guess I am picky.
Yeah, I suppose that is pretty particular, but you're not, there's not too many requirements there. So I think that's fair. Now, I mentioned you love to share stories and you come from a storytelling tradition. So I would love to hear, what does that mean to you first? Just saying you come from a storytelling tradition. Just give us a little insight there.
So my dad was a big storyteller, and I think it's different for a lot of communities, but a lot of what I've heard is, and also might be true for ours, is that storytelling, we come from storytelling traditions because a lot of times our languages were not translated into English for the wider populace. And so when we went to go look for books for us, there were no books in our languages. For example, and very few of indigenous communities have their own syllabaries, so it had to kind of be an oral tradition. And in terms of like how we practice our ceremonies and how I learned about my ceremonies, that was really about being in it and having somebody talk me through it. And then if I would ask questions later, I never just got an answer, I got a story. And so I feel like that's the tradition that I grew up with in my house. And my dad was just filled with stories. He always had some crazy story of where he lived or what he experienced. And so every night, we'd bug him and say, tell me a story. And then he'd tell us one, and we'd tell me another one. And he was probably kind of mixing them up and making them up and who knows, but it really kind of broadened the way that I heard the words. So when I think of storytelling and language, before I write things down, oftentimes on my run, I will hear the way words sound. Like, oh, these words sound beautiful together. Or it'll just appear in my mind. So that's kind of how it's transcended in me.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I'm hearing storytelling coming up a lot. I don't know if it's becoming a buzzword. I think it kind of is. But I do think a lot about how we have, in many ways, a lot of people, myself included, have lost that ability to recognize the power and the not only the not just inclusion in terms of like the more diversity and equity based inclusion model, but also just like feeling connected to someone, feeling close to people that you get from telling a story. And I do think we have lost touch with that in some ways. And I love that you have managed to maintain that. But I think you said about your dad telling you stories, but like, I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I can't imagine saying like, oh, let me tell you a story. Like that seems so intimidating to me, to make up a story for my 3-year-old before bed. But really, as you said, that was a very special thing between you and your father. And for anyone who had that growing up, their parents telling them a story, it's always special. It doesn't matter if it's the worst story in the world. Like it's something that is created and gets us as adults to think in that way, but also is special for the child too, in terms of that connectedness, rather than just, I mean, half the time when I'm reading, and I don't know if you ever have done this, half the time when I'm reading to my daughter at night, I notice that I'm like thinking about something else while I'm reading to her, because I'm not even like paying attention, because I've read the book so many times that I'm just like thinking about something else. So sorry, I took over that completely, but do you think there is a lot of that missing in a lot of society today?
So I have to say that I love that during the pandemic, so many podcasts popped up. So podcasts is like documentary, but for your ears, right?
For sure.
It's storytelling. And so for me, I feel like there's been a resurgence, and it might look different. It might be called something different. And in this case, it is called a podcast, and sometimes they're informational, but a lot of times they're oral histories. I mean, that's what you're doing when you capture oral histories, is you investigate how people feel and about their lives, and you allow them to speak, right? And I think because with audio, especially, you really can't interrupt. You have to let the person begin and end. It forces you to become a good listener. So I think we're always there's always storytelling. It's all over. You just have to listen for it, to be aware of it. And some of it is also visual, like as a visual artist, I don't always have to hear words or read things, but I can see stories happening. Like I have a neighbor, it sounds creepy, but from my building, I can see across the way, there's a lady who lives across the way, and the way she cares for her garden is just out of this world. And how in the year and a half that I've lived across from her, I've seen throughout the seasons how much time she puts into it. And so I've created this story in my mind of her relationship and what the garden means to her.
Yeah, so, that's special. Have you ever spoken to her?
Once I asked if I could use her hose.
You're like, I know you will have one. Well, I know you do have one because I watch you use it every 4 times a day.
I was like, there's a practical reason for spying on this lady.
Well, I would love for you to hear the story.
I don't want to get to know her. I don't want to get to know her. Because
you don't want to?
No, I know she's a nice person. She's a best friend of someone in my building. And I know she's a very good person, but I like the mystery.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Okay. So then within your work, some of your creative outlets, you photograph landscapes and you look at things with an indigenous perspective. I would love for you to talk about that. Like, where was that something you've always done? Where did that come in? And how might that be different to other photography that is out there?
Sure. So I haven't always framed it that way. Mm-hmm. I would say that I picked up a camera when I was 12 and I was already drawing and writing stories. And so I was pretty in touch with kind of with the visual artist side of me. And then we moved and it was like this pretty big emotional shock. And I picked up a camera right around that time and the camera became my voice. And I was capturing stories that I was trying to figure out that ended up being related to my life. So some of the first photographs I was taking were of unhoused people. Mm-hmm. And my mom was homeless for a really, really long time, which is one of the reasons why we were separated from her. And I knew that was one of the only things I knew about her, but I didn't understand anything else. And so I, took to the streets and I wanted to discover what that meant. And so kind of throughout my life, I think that I was photographing a lot of things I was trying to understand, or things that I was passionate about. And then at a certain point, I switched cameras. Okay. I had been shooting with a 35 millimeter, which is a rectangle, which is, this is how we've all trained our eyes looking at cinema. And then I started shooting with a medium format camera, and the negative itself is a square. And all of a sudden, it just kind of, I had to feel like I had to start all over because it was symmetrical. It's like there was a circle. Yeah. A circle is a square, and I just had never kind of put everything in this little round space or this kind of like perfectly symmetrical space. And it took me a long time to try to figure out what I wanted to see through that kind of camera. And that's when I really transitioned to photographing landscapes because the land stood still. Whereas with the 35 millimeter, in the history of photography, the 35 millimeter was the camera that allowed photographers to leave their studios and go into the street because they could carry it. It was a small camera. And so even though the camera that I had, I could take out, it was heavier. And I really had to think about composition in a different way. So photographing people wasn't as easy. Mm-hmm. So, so I started to photograph the land. And I think there was a pivotal trip that I took where I went through Oregon. I was going to Washington State, and there was, we pulled over, and there was an abandoned lumber yard. And it just, I don't know, it almost brought me to tears because I saw all of these trees that had been killed for nothing. And they were stacked up in all these beautiful, like modern kinds of ways, like just slats over slat over slat. And so there were all these gorgeous lines. And so I was at once mesmerized by the beauty of the natural shapes, and then, angered because, why would you do this? What in thinking of all the loss that had come from this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really made the shift of the way that I think about land and how we use it and how we see it and perceive it is different. And it's because of the ways that our traditions are interwoven with our unique landscapes. So when I moved to Washington, D.C., in 2007, 2006, that project, this native land, really, that's when it really blew up. And I decided essentially that from now on, I was only going to envision that I was going to remind myself and envision that this is all indigenous land. Yeah. And once I kind of made that mental shift, and it was really hard to explain. I feel like only in the last year, people have been really understanding that concept. And this was, however many years ago. Then I was able to really look at it in a deeper way. And here, because we're close to the South in Washington, D.C., when I would go out and photograph the land, not only was I thinking about the communities that were no longer here, whose ancestral territory this is, but I was also thinking about the history of enslaved people. And so it's been basically impossible for me not to look at the land any other way now. I often wonder whose blood was shed here, mm-hmm. whose I think about families maybe that, I don't know, farm the land, or, like we're out, I don't even picnicking, doing whatever, fishing. Because the land is thriving, the waters are thriving, and they continue to give us life. And that's the relationship that I want to maintain with my ecosystems, is one of reciprocity. And so I don't want to just go out on a run or a ride or a hike or whatever, and not, and it be kind of an extractive relationship. I'm just like, thank you, land. I got the stress out today. So I think, so what I do is I do photograph a lot with my iPhone now, because it has a very good lens, but also because I don't want to be that person who's like, I'm going to come back and take that picture, because the light is only there at that moment. That emotion, that feeling, that connection is only there in that moment. And so I stop a lot in my runs or my walks to try to capture that sensation, and that reconnects me with the land.
I love that. Thank you. That's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's interesting what you were saying about the logs there and how that started it, of being able to recognize those two things, as you said, the beauty, but also the devastation and just that crushing feeling. Like I very much felt that quite a bit when I've seen people in my area have been cutting down these giant trees, and they're like huge, like older than anyone on this world. But then so I see that and my heart breaks and sinks, and I feel like sick. But then like I have that moment where I can like trace my fingers along the rings on the inside, and it's so beautiful to look at it and to think about that, and to think about that tree and how it's like the things it's seen and the things it's been there for. And yeah, so but it is hard but it's good that we can recognize that it can still be devastating, and it is, but you can also, as you said, stop to appreciate and to be thankful for what that nature has done. And you mentioned there about, you basically said a version of, you believe that there is, and we should all believe, that there is no separation between people and the land. And tribal sovereignty is kind of the heart of everything for Native people. But some of my listeners may have heard this word sovereignty going around, or not going around, but in conversations, but not really understood what that meant. So maybe before we go any further into this, as you and I are both very passionate about talking about the environment, what does tribal sovereignty mean? I know that's something you have to explain all the time, but just to start there.
Most people actually don't ask. I think they're just kind of used to hearing it, and I don't know what they assume, but they know it's a powerful phrase. Yeah. They know it's something that is ours. But so I'm really interested in American Indian law, and I have a very good friend who teaches American Indian law. And so I'm someone who also collects words, and I speak other languages, and so law itself is, it's like very dry language. And I really wanted to understand why our laws on our reservations, on our lands, I wanted to understand how they came from constitutional law. And so I sat down with my friend and I said, this notion of sovereignty, this was a European notion, right? So while it is a word that we use to show that we have nation-to-nation status, that we have federal recognition, all of these concepts are still coming from European law. And so I think that they were words that we had to use in order to be diplomatic with, with the English, with the French, with, the U.S. when the U.S. came to be. So, but it's a word that I think that has very different meaning today for Native people than it does for non-Native people in the U.S. and how we understand how it works. Because I think when people hear sovereignty, they think of maybe like it's an international word. That's exactly what it is, because when those people came from other countries, they brought that international law here. And so that's where we also talk about nation to nation status. And so the nation to nation status is, the nation is the US, and then whichever tribal federation they're working with is the other nation. You have to have legal agreements in order to, make a decision of some sort. So tribal sovereignty really is, it's, if you're federally recognized, I mean, it is for all of us, but legally, if you're federally recognized, tribal sovereignty essentially means that we have self-determination. So our tribes can make the decisions for our people about how to use the land, about our health care, about the laws to a certain extent, because they've already been written. But and so it's just kind of it's very dry, because on the one hand, tribal sovereignty essentially just kind of exemplifies the laws that individual tribes have on their own land. But within the tribe, we do talk a lot about sovereignty, like body sovereignty, sovereignty, food sovereignty. And a lot of what that is like a reclamation, a reminder for our people today that we have protection. We live within we have our own nations, we have self-determination, and we have to remind ourselves of this, because we have been stripped of these concepts for so long. And we have to remind people outside of the reservation as well, outside of our lands, that we too have our own laws that protect us, that protect our foods, our waters, our plants, our people, our ceremonies, our languages. So I think sovereignty has grown to be understood in a pretty vast way that's applicable to a lot of things, but it really does come down to this legal understanding that federal tribes have self-determination based on laws.
Thank you to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this episode of the Running For Real podcast. Athletic Greens is the health and wellness company that makes comprehensive daily nutrition really simple. With so many stresses in our lives, it can be difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our body the nutrients it needs to survive. Busy schedules, poor sleep, exercise, environment, work stress, or simply not eating enough of the right foods can leave us deficient in key areas. AG1 by Athletic Greens is the category-leading superfood product which brings comprehensive and convenient daily nutrition to everyone. Keeping up with the research, knowing what to do, taking a bunch of pills and capsules is hard on the stomach and hard to keep up with. So to help each one of us be at our best, they simplify the path to better nutrition by giving you the one thing with all the best things. I have been taking Athletic Greens AG1 for about 2 years now, and honestly, I can't imagine my life without it. It is the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. I've mentioned this many times. I take it with me when I travel, and I take it when I travel, which most things when we travel, we tend to forget. And even if we take it, we don't do it. I am obsessive about getting in my Athletic Greens, and that is because one tasty scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food source ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, all in one convenient daily serving. The special blend of high-quality, bioavailable ingredients in a scoop of AG1 work together to fill those nutritional gaps in your diet, support energy and focus, aid with gut health and digestion, support a healthy immune system. Effectively, you're replacing multiple products or pills with one delicious drink. So we are at Running For Real. We have a special code just for you to make it easy. Athletic Greens can give you this immune supporting product along with a free 1 year supply of vitamin D, something we all need going through the winter, and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase by going to athleticgreens.com/Tina. That's athleticgreens.com/Tina to take control of your health and give AG1 a try. Thank you for explaining that. And, I know you said that surprises me that that people don't really ask, but, I know is something that, as you said, there's quite a lot of concepts involved, but I appreciate you taking the time to bring it together and explain it in both a simple and a more detailed sense. Okay, so with that, we talked about there being no separation between, us as humans and the land, and you talked about wanting to give back and not just taking or extracting from the earth. And that is very much the way that human beings definitely, in the Western world, in the global North, whatever you want to say, have been seeing this as like, we've got to maximize the resources that Earth has. We've got to find a way to get the most out of it. And we're going to take all these things that are in the ground and use them for other things so that we as humans can keep being the master of the world. But obviously that means something different to you. So what would you like to remind the listeners today about, how we are connected to the ecosystems that surround us, the natural world? I mean, shouldn't ever really be something that is, owned and bought and have money like attached to it. So we'd love to hear your perspective there.
Sure. I mean, I ask myself this every day because I'm living in a city that is kind of the nature is woven into the city here. And so it's actually really easy for me to get into Rock Creek Park, which is a national park here.
Yep.
There's a lot of greenery. But I ask myself this question every day because I'm trying to explain to my son, who's having a very different upbringing than I am. Our tribe is in Tucson. He's thousands of miles away from that. There aren't indigenous communities here that I'm deeply connected with. And so it's very abstract for him. But in terms of, the way that I try to be cognizant of it is, and that I like to share with people is, in order to kind of resist this extractive relationship that you can have with nature, is to try to, we can't undo what we've already done. So moving forward, when you're recreating on the land, for example, sharing with people that when you're recreating on the land, wherever you are, now you have a responsibility to learn about the land. And I think that once people start learning about where they're recreating, they become more passionate about it, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And just like with anything, with your animals, the things you love, once you become passionate about it and learn more about it, you want to fight for it. Mm-hmm. You want it to survive. And I think once people kind of open that little door and start learning about like the plants, their ecosystems, for example, and learning about the ancestral tribes that were there, that's one way that I have found personally has been really helpful for me connecting to the landscape here, because this is not the landscape of my people. I'm a guest here, so that's what I want to do. And I greet the land, sometimes usually on my runs, the first 2 miles are, when my body's just warming up. And after mile 2, that's when I kind of get to this point where in my mind, I'm starting to greet the land. I'm really able to zone out and tune in to my environment. And so there's...
Can you do that when you're surrounded by urban jungle? You still feel you can...
Even more so. Yeah. Okay. It's even more so because I get so upset by the pollution and the noise and, I just get pretty angered because I feel like, we're taking up space here. The roads are taking up space. And I see, on sidewalks when trees are trying to break through the concrete, I'm like, yes, I know it's like, will probably trip me on my next run, but I'm just like, yes, because that is what you do. That is the resurgence of life of these plants. And the plants here have taught me so much. I mean, granted, there's an invasive species that grows a lot, but when I came to the East Coast, it was so green here and I was blown away, and it just keeps coming and coming and coming and kind of overwhelming you. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I just thought, this is the land fighting back. These are the trees saying, this is our place. There were vines growing everywhere and people are constantly mowing and chopping and doing all this horrible stuff. And so in terms of just like living one's daily life, I really try to acknowledge where I am, acknowledge whose land I'm on, create a relationship wherever I am, whether it's with the land or the waters or the animals. And how it extends to, climate change and what we can do about it. How can we resolve these things? I think we all know that it's the big corporations that are making, the big decisions. And the only thing that I feel like I can do is protest. I can educate. I can try to live a life that is less extractive, and that has a small ecological footprint. But yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. It was just kind of talking. I distracted you, I think, when I went off, when I asked you that question about being feeling it in the open. So was there anything else to remind you of that you were saying about, greeting the land? Did you finish what you were going to say there? Or did I take you?
No, I think that's...
Okay. Well, a few things there. One, you're exactly right about nature fighting back. And I think about that with Chernobyl, how, I don't know if you've seen, but like now Chernobyl is covered in green. And so even in an area that was destroyed like that, it's still, nature is coming back. And I often have to correct people when they talk about like, we don't know if the world's going to be here, like we're going to destroy the planet, it's going to explode or something. And I used to say this as well, but like, it's like, no, the world will be here. Like planet Earth is here. It's whether we stay here, because nature will keep finding a way through and keep coming back. Whereas it's whether we put it to a place where we can no longer survive. Okay, so let's talk about the climate crisis a little bit in terms of that, as you are a lifelong indigenous activist, environmentalist. Climate activists, or at least those who have done a lot of research and understand how we're going to figure this out, often talk about the fact that Native American indigenous perspectives on things, the way that many indigenous people have been living their life for many years, are exactly what we want to be doing to figure this out, to pull ourselves out of things. I mean, the one that comes to mind is it an otter or is it a beaver? Beaver, right? I think it's like there's...
there's a recent reintroduction of otters.
Otters, was it?
I think it's in Oregon.
Yeah, that might be it.
Which story you're talking about, but I was actually going to bring them up.
Yeah, yes. Okay, well, maybe you can explain it better than me, but like, the answers are there. Many of the answers are there. We just need to ask these indigenous communities. And I saw you talk about the IPCC report and how there were no indigenous contributors whatsoever, which is not good. And mostly white men on the report. But let's talk about that element of things. Like, I'll just let you go from there before I keep rambling on.
Sure. I hear the statistics and I read them. I see them a lot about the certain percentage of indigenous people that occupy the planet, that protect certain parts of the planet. And I think what that concept is really trying to relay is this idea again of having an extractive relationship with the land, but also understanding that, and indigenous people, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We do bad things too. But I think what they were trying to say is that holistically, what we have seen is that indigenous people, if you understand your land or your waters, have shown for hundreds of years that they don't take all the fish that season. They don't cut down all the trees, right? It's like this 1/3 relationship or 2/3 relationship. You only take what you need. And then you feed the elders first, and then everybody else gets what they need. And then you let the land or the waters do what they're going to do. because you can't just completely erase everything. Like, that's not how Mother Nature works. There's a reason for it, right? And so I think that's one of the concepts, is understanding this totality of extraction that the U.S. and the world has become used to. Like, let's buy some land and let's grow things on it that have never grown there before, but we want to make a lot of money, right? So I think that's one of the concepts, is like, okay, let's look towards indigenous people and see how they have cared for their lands and waters. And what you always find is that there's, that concept of to only take what you need. And then you see the natural resurgence and natural growth processes of animals and plants and, the entire ecosystem. In terms of the IPCC report, I knew it. I was like, man, I bet you I know who wrote this thing. Because when people just use the word, indigenous, and they're always pointing at indigenous people, we love indigenous people, it's like, that's not how necessarily we talk about it. I could tell in the report that it was, a third person kind of reference. And so, yeah, I dug into it. I was like, who wrote, I wanted to know who was on there's in the front, there's a section that shows which scientists were listed from each country that contributed. And yeah, I looked at their LinkedIn, I read some of their papers. I wanted to know what their bios were, because sometimes, you can't assume that somebody is indigenous just by looking at them. But I really thought, okay, the indigenous academics that I know and leaders that I know will pretty much always, somewhere in their bio, state their community, because that's what you do. That's how you introduce yourself. You introduce yourself within your community by sharing who you're related to. And there's no different in the academic world or in the business world. And so, yes, I saw that there were, whatever it was, like 10 people, 8 of them were white men, and 2 of them were people of color from other countries. And yet the entire report, there's this constant reference to all the great things that indigenous people have done, and how we should be doing things like them. But what I didn't like is that there was still never a sense of responsibility for the displacement of those indigenous people, right? So it was like, we want the benefits of their knowledge, but we don't want to accept any of the burden of what we've done. And that tends to be the kind of understanding, is like, oh, we want the benefits of your natural remedies, but we don't want the burden of having removed you from the land. And so now you don't have access to those plants.
Thank you to Guarina for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Now, I've mentioned before, you will struggle to find a day where I'm not wearing a pair of Guarina. I love them. They are fun, fashionable, affordable, and they are just great to have around. I have pairs everywhere. They last a long time. My kids love putting them on their face. They're functional, and they are only $25 and $35 for the 2 different styles. Now, every purchase of Guarina sunglasses is backed by a 1-year warranty. They have 30-day free returns, so you can send those back if you are not liking the style, which, by the way, they have styles to match every personality. If you want the regular black frames, black lenses, go for that. But they also have really fun ones to match your personality. And Guarina is a 100% carbon neutral company. I love that they took this pledge many years ago. They also became proud members of 1% for the planet since 2018. They very much align with Running for Real and what they are doing environmentally, which means, by the way, 1% for the planet means 1% of their annual gross sales go directly to environmental nonprofits working towards making our world a better place. So some of my favorites, I did mention the Black with Black. That's a ginger soul. I also love Gardening with a Kraken. The names, by the way, amazing. Just so fun. And there's also some aviator style ones, which I love as well. So you can go to goodr.com/Tina. That's goodr.com/Tina to get yourself 15% off your order. They also have some blue blockers there if you want to go check those out. So go to goodr.com/Tina to go get yourself 15% off. And I think, that's obviously on a smaller level, kind of what is happening all over, right? In everything, and just the way that we are living our life. And yes, people are starting to talk about the land being stolen, or talk about, how important it is to, as you said, say the land that you are on, and whose land it is. But we've still got a long way to go as individuals, before we're even close to, appreciating and accepting what has happened in the past, and being able to take accountability for that. Anything else you'd add there?
No. In terms of the IPCC report, no. Mm-hmm. Not really.
Okay. No, that's fine. Okay. Let's bring it back to running here. In terms of, you were just a moderator and panelist and completed the 2021 Women Run the Vote 2.0, which covered 907 miles. And I might have to have you help me, speaking of need work to do, pronounce some of the, Apasaloki? I don't know, because I'm not from those tribes, what the proper pronunciation is either. Okay.
I've heard different ways of pronouncing them, but I also don't want to butcher.
Okay. Well, just leave me butchering it.
You can spell it out. I think some of it is in the English, using English alphabet. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's Crow lands as well.
Yes.
APSAALOOKE, lands at Yellowstone National Park and ended in Duwamish Territory in Seattle, Washington. $110,000 was raised in total, and 37,000 each went to Duwamish Tribe of Seattle, National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and Runners for Public Lands. Amazing effort there, and a really cool thing. We participated at Running for Real. We had a team as well, so amazing thing to be a part of. But well, firstly, did you participate in 2020? Were you aware of it in 2020? Mm-hmm. You did it.
So, okay. My friend Keisha Roberson, who now is on the, she's one of the women who manages Run for All Women. Mm-hmm. She's based here in DC, and she's a runner and a cyclist as well. So I had already been following her on Instagram on local things. And then I saw that she was connected with Wazelle and with Allison. And yes, I did do the virtual run last year, which was very informative. And it was, up the coast from the south, with all the pin drops that were educating on the history of voting in the African-American community.
Yeah, it was really well done. I mean, this year, I didn't do it last year, with just the education piece, with the daily email, with check-ins. Like, I really admire how it was put together. And so tell us, what was your role in the planning and preparation for this?
So Allison reached out to me after they had decided, what they wanted to do. And she asked if I wanted to come on as a storyteller, basically a creative and a storyteller. And she explained how it was going to work. She said this year we're only going to have 20 pin drops. I think last year they had 40, but felt like that was a lot of information. So there was going to be 20 pin drops, and I was going to do 10 of them. And then my partner, Danae Dorme, who's host of Grounded Pod, she wrote the first 10 pin drops. I wrote the second 10 pin drops. And it was exciting for me because I've always been really interested in the Pacific Northwest Coast tribes. And so it was great. Like, I got to dig into what little I knew about them, about those tribes along the way, because I had familiarity with all of them. But then it also gave me an opportunity to learn more about these tribes, and also to decide kind of like what I thought other people should know. And I mean, not that was, totally my decision, because we had to run it through the powers that be at Wazelle, but it was great. So then I also wrote a blog post on the history of Native American voting, and contributed to a couple of social media posts that they put up on their Friday posts. So it was pretty wonderful. I had a great experience. It was very, very intense, as usual. Writing about the history and even the contemporary lives of indigenous people is emotionally very exhausting, because what I find is that non-native people are, most non-native people don't have any reference point to start from, and that's not necessarily their fault. Like, this country has done a very good job of removing us from school, anything you learn in, K through 12. And so I find that a lot of people are doing catch up, and they're doing it very quickly. And so I wanted to provide information that was both broad, but that dug in deeply. So I really had to think about the language that I wanted to use, and really to try to so I made a list of words that I thought, okay, these are important words for Native people. And so I kind of interwove them throughout all of the content that I provided, and then would, reference back to them, introduce what they meant, and then use them over and over and over again, so that maybe they would stick in your mind too.
Yeah.
And sovereignty is one of them.
Yeah. And I mean, I really was just so impressed with everything, every piece of content that came out during that time and afterwards. It really was very well done. So thank you for your part in that. And so related to that, your running and just that connection to the land. Before we started recording, you said to me about how you run to imagine what would make the world better, or just how to connect with it. So tell us a little bit more about what running and how running and your community, your beliefs, your just the other pieces of you come together during your runs.
Sure. So, I started running when I was a kid, like most kids, just running in the neighborhood, right? And then I tried to participate in some sports. But as an adult, running has 100% been helping me for mental health reasons. So what I do now, because I work so much like in my own photography and in my storytelling with the land around me, I don't even have to think about it anymore. But once I kind of get into that zone after the first 2 miles, stories come to mind. I start thinking about what I want to teach about, what I want to write about, what I don't know about. And it's, nature will always provide no matter where you are, and nature will never fail. I will never know enough. I will never know it all. And it changes from day to day. And so my process when I go out there and run is to think about, how can I make my day better? And the run itself always does that for me. But I usually come home with a couple of photographs that then I work on and can set the tone for something I want to write that day. Or even if I don't share it, I just put it down on paper for myself. And so it's kind of like this really beautiful, like, connection for me throughout the day that I keep returning to. And we were talking a little bit about storytelling before we started recording. And I had this conversation with a friend recently who wants me to write a story. And so he said, oh, this publication, this is what they write. So he sent me a link to a story, and it was very well written, but it was so boring. I mean, I was just like, and I said to him, it's not my cup of tea. And he wanted to know why. And I said, because I want to tell stories. And I think the stories that need to be told are the ones that have never been told, that they need to move you, and they need to be told. Don't tell me the same story over and over again. I don't want to hear that anymore. And so not to say that like I have to put in all of my passions in my creative work, but I want to make sure that when I share a story or a photograph, it's going to be the first, like, you've never seen that, but you've never heard that word before. You've never seen like the two words fit together in a sentence that way. Because that's how I want to be blown away when I read something or I see something. And music does that a lot for me. I feel like I get more sometimes from music than I do from books because of the way that words are woven together in a non-traditional way. So so on my runs, I process all of these thoughts, and then throughout the day, that experience, I can continue to revisit that experience throughout the day.
I love that, and it's interesting what you were saying about the stories that need to be told, the stories that should be told, the ones that have never been heard. I mean, so much of the difficulty in this world that we're living in with technology, with so much noise going on, is, I mean, I often think about the stories that have been shared on a smaller scale, or someone, whether it be music or some kind of photography or like drawing or whatever, that has been created, and yet it hasn't been able to reach people enough that could blow them away and change the way they think about things, or to really give that new perspective. And that is something that I mentioned to you before we started recording, is the difficulty with, in many ways, we are so used to the same stories, and the people who have the advantages behind them to get these same stories out again and again. And that's where, here, as I mentioned to you, running through, I am not interested in that anymore. Like, the same stories that have been told, slightly different each time. Do you have any thoughts on how we can get to a point where people are willing to take a leap of faith and to listen or learn or read or watch things that aren't necessarily what they've done in the past? How can we get people to open up their minds to try these things when there's not the backing of experience to go along with it? Or not necessarily experience, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure. I mean, right. It's like, if we think about words we use with social media, it's like if something isn't trending, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We know that those things last for a millisecond and then it's on to the next thing. But I feel like I don't know how to encourage people to, I'm not asking anyone to change who they are, but I love independent films. I always have loved independent films. I love alternative music. I love music from around the world. Even if I don't understand what they're saying, I can feel the emotion and the passion. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what people aren't reading. So like secondhand bookstores are wonderful for that. You just have to take a leap of faith, and that's really what it is like it's great to highlight people who are doing amazing things, but if that's the only person that is representing their particular community, it's really not representative. It's just not. And so I think whether you call it taking a leap of faith or really recognizing that everybody has a unique story. I mean, there's I love the title of films. Some titles of films just blow me away. Like, I don't even have to see the film. Maybe the film is crappy, but I love the title Ordinary People. And that's what we all are. We're all just ordinary people, but you just never know what stories people have. You don't never know what lives they've lived. And that's worth the risk, the risk.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Of getting to know somebody that might open up something in you. And that's where you'll find the thing you don't know, I don't know. It's just.
Do you think it connects to what we were talking about earlier, that like extractive relationship that many people have with the land? It's the same thing of like, if I learn from someone who if it's a runner who's won all these things or has been on all these shows and knows what to say, or if it's a movie that 98% of people on Rotten Tomatoes recommend, like it's always like, well, that's an easy win. Like, it's do you think it's related to that, like efficiency? Like, if I'm going to spend my time on something, I want it to be good, and I know it's good if other people have said it's good.
I think particularly in this country, you know, the ethos that, you know, that this country has fed everybody. You know, this is the land of the free. It's you come here and you can become a success. You know, everything is wrapped up in a pretty little box with a red bow at the end, and you get your, you know, your happy ending. And those are the kind of movies that are big here too. You know, everybody wants this like perfect finality, but that's obviously not the real world. And so I think that part of that is escapism that we're all allowed to do and experience. And the same goes with not feeling like you have to invest too much, right, in how you treat the land and in how you treat your neighbors. And because you're not taking the time really to feel those feelings, feel those emotions, to consider what your actions are. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it goes hand in hand. I think that this country has a very difficult time talking about their emotions, confronting themselves. You know, the word argue, I think in America means like yelling at one another. But when I lived in France, you know, people would argue, discute is the word, right? And it just means like intense talking. And I remember just being like really intimidated because people would be yelling at each other, you know, husband and wife that loved each other, yelling at each other across the table. And then boom, it was done. You know, and maybe that's just very French, but I found that when I came back to America, everybody was avoiding the truth. Mm-hmm. They wanted the pretty little package, and they just wanted the happy ending. And that's because that's how this country has written itself, right? It has written the experience with Native people out of the story, has not acknowledged that genocide. It's has not acknowledged, you know, what enslavement did to Black people, has not acknowledged the real experience of immigrants that have come to this country. You know, it's always highlighted the success stories, and that's just not reality. Though that's a trend. I don't know. It's part of the trend.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's just interesting to think about. Something I've definitely been aware of recently. And you caught me off guard there with the immigrant piece as well, because I mean, I'm an immigrant, but I'm not what, you know, many people would think of when they think of the word immigrant. And yet I have really been coming to terms a lot with a lot of the, like, I've often had people make comments to me like, oh, well, you don't count. And I'm like, why? Like that's not fair, is it? Like, just because I have white skin and I come from the UK, like, you can't put some people in one box and I'm in a box with America because of the way I look and the country I'm from. And so I have been thinking a lot about that immigrant piece and how I have been treated very well, but how unfair that is, and how, you know, I actually kind of like it when I actually hate it, but there's a part of me that loves when I come in through immigration and they give me a really hard time, because I'm like, okay, at least you are giving me a hard time, because you should be giving maybe not quite as hard of a time as they give to everyone, but they should be giving everyone a bit of a tough time coming in here and asking us questions. So that's the one area that I do feel has done a decent job of making sure that I also am, you know, vetted, I should say, before I come in. But there's a lot of work to do. Okay. To wrap up here, I would love just to quickly go over some of the things that you are currently working on, passionate about. I mean, you can mention you've got quite a few different projects and accounts on Instagram. So whichever one of those or all of those you want to mention for people to go follow and find.
Yeah. So this past year I was really struggling. My brother, he does all kind of computer stuff. And I was like, he built a website for me a long time ago, but nobody went to websites and they don't go to websites anymore. So he kept saying, put your projects on Instagram. And now I'm trying to keep track. I think I have 5 Instagram accounts, but they really, it's fine. It's fine. I don't work on each of them every single day. They need to exist so that if I'm trying to share, you know, a piece that I've worked on, I can say, oh, just go here. Like, I don't have a website. But yeah, so my main account essentially is, you know, I just share my feelings. I do some education on there, and it's a lot just about connecting with, you know, the land. And So that's just Guarina Lopez. The second one that I started last year, actually around this time, is called Yaqui Rain Runner. Because I had a lot of people who were, it was during the pandemic, people were starting, they're dealing with the color of their skin in a different way. And I had a lot of friends who have known that I was Native. I've been friends with them for a long time, but for the first time, were starting to ask, they would say, I want to learn. I don't know anything. So I said, okay, I'm going to start this education account. And so that's Yaqui Rain Runner. And it started off just very basic, like understanding what words like sovereignty mean, what is nation to nation status, just kind of basic stuff. And I would share culture and art on there as well. And then I have an account called Personal Regalia Modern Natives, or Modern Natives Personal Regalia. Sorry. It's a project that I did in 2010, and it's an oral history and photography project. And it features indigenous people from, I think, about 15 different tribes. And I asked them each one question, which was elaborated each time I would pose it. But essentially what does it mean to exist as a Native person in a contemporary world when you don't live near your tribe? Like, how do you retain your culture? Yeah. And so the personal regalia part of it is that no matter where we are, the regalia becomes our skin and becomes our memories. And so that's as modern natives, the personal regalia has to be within us.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So it was a really powerful project. And then I have Native Women Ride, which is, indigenous people on bikes. And then I have This Native Land, which is the photography project. And so with each of them, some of them I keep very separate. Some of them kind of, mix, one goes into the other. Initially, when I started Yaqui Rain Runner, I wanted to keep my politics off of my views rather off of my personal page. And then I was like, I can't keep separating these parts. It's just not who I am. And some people said to me, like, you're so radical. I didn't know that. and I just thought, well, yeah, I didn't share that part of myself, I guess.
I was going to say, surely that's me. You just didn't see it before. So I changed who I am. Yeah. Well, okay. I will put links to all of those in the show notes. You also missed Call Me By My Name project.
Call Me By My Name. See, I forget them all. So that is a fun one. Yes, I had posted this video about, I wrote down this piece because I needed to get it out. And essentially it was just about the history of people mispronouncing my name and what that's done to my psyche and how that is something that happens to a lot of people in the US who have, non-Western sounding names. Posted a video and I wasn't expecting anybody to see it. And I got personal messages saying, thank you, this is my experience. And one of my friends here said, you should start a project. And I said, fine, I will. We'll see what happens. And I got so many videos of people telling me their name stories. And so, yeah, it was like really, really, every week I was posting something in the spring. But it became a little overwhelming because it's kind of like producing a podcast. You have to reach out to people. Yeah. You have to organize the time and explain to them how it works. And because it's all self-directed, I had to do a little bit of that, of this is how you should hold your camera and make sure that they got this lighting or this sound, especially. But it was really fun. And it's still what it's kind of morphed into as well, which I don't mind, is the way that names have been contemporized into hashtags when there's remembrances. So throughout the pandemic, Black and brown bodies were still being, we were still dying. And so I started to, rather than post a name story, would just post, hashtag George Floyd, hashtag Breonna Taylor, hashtag, whomever, as a way to keep their name alive, I would have loved to have these people speak their names, but this is the best I can do. And so it's a mixture of actual videos and hashtags of people's names.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. I'll put links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you and all the work you are doing, and look forward to hearing what everyone else thinks and how they can follow along in the future. So thank you for your time and all the hard work that you do.
Thank you, Tina. It's been great.
Hi, friends. Just a quick message to say a big thank you to the Running for Real team. While I may be the face of Running for Real and the voice behind the podcast, there are a group of people who are working tirelessly to provide everything that runners could need within our community to make our community stronger, better, and evolve and grow and learn from one another. We are working really hard to make Running for Real the place we believe it can be within our community. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone on our team. That is Victoria, Stacy, Sandy, Sally, Maria, Kelsey, Kat, Jeremy, and Erica. I appreciate each and every one of you and the hard work that you put in. Now let's get back to the show. Really appreciate Guarina and all that she is doing to make our running world a better place, to make it more inclusive, to make it more diverse, to really make sure that the land is acknowledged and that Native and indigenous communities are also recognized. As it is Native American Indian Heritage Month this month, we need to be making sure that this is a priority for all of us, and we are thinking about the things that Guarina and I talked about today. Just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Firstly, to Tracksmith, who every purchase you make when you use code TINA15, you will give 5% of your order. The money from your order is going to go to Runners for Public Lands. So use code TINA15 and you'll be supporting Runners for Public Lands with your order, and you'll get free shipping. I also want to thank Athletic Greens. You can get a 1-year free supply of vitamin D plus 5 free travel packs with your order by going to athleticgreens.com/Tina. And finally, to Gooda. Thank you to Gooda for giving my listeners 15% off when you go to gooda.com. That's GOODR.com/Tina. Thank you so much to our sponsors. Thank you to Guarina. We will see you next week.